Welcome back to part two of our demystification series with Jessica Wood from Standard & Poor's. And what are the important financial areas that Standard & Poor's looks at when schools put together a package?
Sure. I mean, while there are many financial metrics and, many things we look at when we receive audited financials, when we look at budgets, we're talking with charter schools, I'd say two key areas that schools that maybe don't have a public rating yet would want to look at and sort of get comfortable with assessing are debt service coverage and days cash on hand, unrestricted days cash on hand. For the first reason being that most charter school bond issuances, public bond issuances, maintain covenants, financial covenants, and they typically are for debt service coverage and for days cash. What we typically see, although there's variation, is a debt service coverage covenant of about 1.1 times, where under 1.1 is not an event of default. Typically, a consultant is brought in, but if under 1 times could be an event of default.
For those non-finance people, can you break it down a little bit more?
Oh, sure. Okay. So when we're looking at overall operations of a charter school, we're also looking at annual debt service coverage. And we're typically the bond's a 30-year bond year. We're looking at principal and interest annually. And we're looking at calculations, basically funds available to pay debt service in a given year over the denominator, which is the debt service coverage due in that year. And so we're looking at a calculation annually of debt service coverage and what these financial covenants are trying to show is that the school has the ability to generate funds available for debt service that are over actual debt service and over 1.1 times. I'll just add to that, those are the covenants, but our medians for say like a BB plus charter school are much higher than a 1.1 times.
What would you think that could?
It could be, I'd have to check and get back to you. But it really depends. But the medians, they are in the high sort of one times. Yeah.
What about days cash on hand?
Yeah. So days cash on hand, the financial covenants we typically see are somewhere like 30, 45 days. Mm-hmm. But many charter schools that we rate in sort of that BB category maintain days cash higher than those levels. There's a range, of course. I don't know what the medians are off the top of my head. But for BB plus and even for BBB minus investment grade, it's around 100 days cash or higher on a median basis.
And this is important information to have, especially up front as you're looking ahead and planning. Let's talk about post-pandemic metrics. What types of things are you looking at post-pandemic?
Yeah, so schools obviously have benefited from several rounds of emergency federal funding. And so that's been from a financial perspective, this has been really good news for charter schools. What we've seen over the past couple of years is that those median levels of days cash on hand are up quite a bit, just given that extra liquidity. What we are focused on now and sort of looking forward, given those funds are still available through 2024, perhaps longer if extended, what we're looking at is how management teams have been making decisions about how and where to spend those emergency one-time funds and whether they have truly been sort of for non-recurring one-time reasons or purposes, or if schools have used those for maybe things that they need to build into the budget for the future and kind of figure it out. So we've heard from a lot of schools that they've added nurses with those funds, but have realized we need the nurses on an ongoing basis. Or maybe they've used those funds for salaries and things that once those funds are gone, they have to figure out a way to bridge that gap. So those are areas.
Those are great points. And while we're talking about money and funding, what about per pupil funding? What types of things are you thinking about there?
Yeah, so this is obviously an area we're always looking at closely for charter schools, especially given per pupil and state funding really drives the bulk of charter schools' budgets. Our chief economist at S&P is forecasting slower economic growth next year, but our states entered 2024 with still pretty healthy levels of reserves and resources. So we're not anticipating cuts to per pupil funding in 2024, but further out, if that should occur, there are a lot of charter schools out there that maybe younger charter schools that haven't faced all parts of the cycle, haven't really dealt with big state cuts to per pupil funding. So should we see something like that, I think that would be an area of concern, but we're not anticipating that for 2024.
Just what about legislation and politics? Uh, every state's different, and every authorizer is different. Can you talk a little bit about how S&P looks at those metrics?
Yes, very carefully. I mean, I think, like I said earlier, we have ratings across almost 30 states now, and we issue charter briefs specifically on many of those states where we have a lot of ratings because if you've seen one, charter school in one charter state, one in one state, you've seen one. I mean, there's a lot of variation, as you said, state to state. There are charter friendly states, there are charter unfriendly states. It is very political. It's one of those sectors in public finance that is probably the most political. So we have subject matter experts. We have a vast group, and we're very focused on latest legislation. What could affect our charter schools in a particular state, and we do follow that. Mm-hmm. I think it's been a little bit quieter this year. I think heading into an election year, we haven't seen. I think there have been some wins. There have also been some challenges, but I don't think anything sort of at the forefront right now. I think post elections we'll see it. We'll see if there's anything more. But I think it's generally been a pretty good year for charter schools.
Thank you. This has been a great start to this series of information for school leaders and board leaders. I want to give you the last word. Since you were kind enough to invite us here to S&P, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about with regards to what S&P does, the sector? We're all very passionate about the charter school sector and the ecosystem. Any last words, advice, thoughts?
I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. We have a great charter school team at S&P. We have almost 20 analysts across the country, and a lot of experience working with charter schools from mom and pop schools to the big networks of the country. And we also are very passionate about education and about, working with these schools. So if there's any charter schools that are, thinking about, expansion or venturing into the public bond market, we're always happy to talk to them and share the steps, share the process. And yeah.
Where can they get, we're going to put your information here, but where can they get in touch with the charter schools team at S&P? Just go to the S&P website.
Yeah, you can go to the S&P website. There's a link with and if you go to the public finance site, specifically, there's a charter school team page that also has a lot of our research and commentaries available complimentary.
It's great reading for the CFOs and the business managers of our schools. Jess, thank you very, very much.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for the opportunity to chat.
You're very welcome. Okay, so signing off here in beautiful, sunny Chicago. This is Robert Giordano with New Plan Learning. See you next time.